All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is popular show and odd things that were going on at the turn of the century. One of them was called the minstrel show, okay? Now, today minstrel has a different meaning, but back then, a minstrel show was a funny show. That's what it was supposed to be, but it had a bigger connotation to it. It was a funny, racist show, okay? One of the big minstrel shows at the turn of the century, and actually a little bit before that, was Jim Crow, which we already talked about, okay? So they would tell Jim Crow to jump, and he would jump, and they would tell him to dance, and he would dance. But as the century turned over, okay, as it turned to the 1900s, people got tired of that old racist show. So the old Jim Crow minstrel shows where people would wear blackface and, you know, they would paint their lips white and red and stuff like that. That fell out of favor, and something else replaced it called vaudeville. Now, vaudeville is still around in various forms. It's basically music, it's comedy skits, mainly comedy skits today, and also ridiculous acts of strength or sword swallowing. All this stuff is vaudeville, okay? It's kind of like a sideshow kind of deal. So a couple of examples of that, we have Three Stooges. I'm sure everybody has seen Three Stooges, or at least know of them, okay? You know, one of them slaps him, and then the other guy hits him in the chin, and then the other one pokes him in the eyes, and all this kind of stuff. So fancy costumes were very common in vaudeville. Also, like I said, music. And this guy right here was a very famous vaudevillian. His name is Eugene Sandow, okay? Now, Eugene Sandow did feats of strength, like the one-arm bent press with two guys in a basket. He's a very strong person. He figured out something that we all know today, that if you exercise certain muscles, they get bigger. We didn't know that before. We just thought there were some big dudes and there's some little dudes, you know? So Eugene Sandow becomes the first bodybuilder in world history, okay? And he actually writes a book about it, and he sells a bunch of them, and he goes out on different tours, and all he does is pose, okay? He stands there in, you know, very skinny underwear, and he's posing. And the ladies are all cheering and all this kind of stuff. He figured he could make more money posing for the ladies than for, you know, doing vaudeville acts. And when I say posing for the ladies, y'all, he was not a stripper. That's not what I'm talking about, okay? He was doing bodybuilding stuff. So, anyway, by the way, he was very strong. Eugene Sandow was very famous at the time. And he's driving around, I think it was New York, somewhere around there. And he ends up going into a ditch during a rainstorm. And there's a crowd that forms around him. And they recognize him because he's really famous. And they say, well, you're the strongest man in the world. Why don't you just pull the car out of the ditch? And he says, okay. So he grabs the bumper and he yanks the car out of the ditch. I mean, he literally did this by himself. This is in the early 1900s. And then he had a massive hemorrhage in his brain and died, okay, from pulling his own car out of the ditch. So, next thing we're going to talk about is the circus, okay? Hopefully your parents brought you to the circus when you were little kids, okay? Got elephants and clowns and all that kind of stuff. The circus was a lot more evil back then than the one you're used to. So, more like scary clowns. They had the good ones too, but the real attraction after the circus was over, the Barnum and Bailey circus, was that they started a sideshow, or a freak show is more appropriate, okay? The sideshow is like sword swallowing and tricks like that where you stick pins through your arm. The freak show is where you take people with genetic defects and you display them for the public to see. And people pay money to see the lobster boy or the wolf boy, you know, the bearded lady, all these different weird people. But what ended up happening is that these freaks, as they called them, Congress said, this is not fair. Barnum and Bailey is taking advantage of these people and the way they look, and we're going to shut them down. So they made sideshows illegal. Congress passed a law, no more sideshows. And the freaks of the sideshow wrote Congress letters, and they said, this is the only way we have to make money. You're taking away our livelihood. So Congress called a special session, for freaks. And they all showed up at the Capitol. And I could imagine it would have been the funniest thing to be there during that meeting when the bearded lady comes in that's 500 pounds and explains to Congress about how they took away her living, or the lobster boy or whatever. So I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of some sideshow freaks that were pretty famous, okay? So here we go. So we have the pinhead, okay? This is a genetic defect that some people still get. Basically, it makes the top of your head really tiny and the bottom of your head really big. I don't even know what's going on with this guy. I mean, tumor guy? I mean, what is this,
So bubbly.
Okay. So I don't know what's up with that. We have the wolf boy, okay, on this side. This is not fake, y'all. This is real stuff, okay? This guy really had a genetic condition that made him grow hair everywhere like a dog, okay? We have, I don't even know what this is. I did have to do a double take here. That is a boxing glove. That's not his, anyway. It kind of looks weird. So, big, tall, skinny guy and short, fat guy. I don't know. All right. So, we have this guy who his legs are skinny and weird. That's all I can say. I don't know about what happened to this guy, okay? Now this one, that's a Siamese twin. That is a real thing. You have people out there that are connected to each other at birth. They have people with 2 heads. I think there's even been a case of someone with 3 heads, if I'm not mistaken. But just really weird guys that made money off of their appearance. And we have, okay. So in, I think it was 1906, the people of New York in the Bronx thought that it was a great idea to bring an African to the zoo and make him live there for 20 years, okay? So we actually displayed a young African man at the zoo, and this was him. He had carved his teeth down, and he filed them down, and eventually they let him out and he ended up killing himself. So that is part of a weird part of our history, that we actually used to put black people in the zoo. Okay? Just Africans though. Not that makes it better. And anyway, so let's talk about this one right here. Blue people of Kentucky. Okay? We talked about weird black people just now. Let's talk about some really weird white people. Okay? So in Kentucky, there was a family that was so inbred. That means that they were marrying their brothers and their cousins and that kind of stuff, that their skin turned blue. That's how bad off they were, okay? They lived in the Appalachian Mountains. There weren't many people around, so you just were with whoever was there, okay? So those are some weird things in American history to make this chapter a little bit funner.